Laffer Associates Chairman and former Trump campaign economic advisor. He was also an economic advisor to Ronald Reagan, as I bow my head, and also known as the father of supply-side economics. Kidding around with Chris. Chris Hughes, the co-founder of Facebook, and now Economic Security Project co-chair. I want to frame it like this, Arthur. I always had the notion that things were different in the United States because people accrue wealth, hopefully some at least, because of a meritocracy. And I don't want a feudal system. I don't want a system where titles and wealth is passed down just by your birthright, and there's no upward mobility. There's this rigid class structure. I thought it was different here. But now that we're in this period, what's wrong when a person has accrued so much wealth that they can't possibly use it all? Nobody deserves, and Chris is probably in that position, nobody deserves this much wealth. They don't. What's wrong with rescinding property rights and everything else we've come to put in the rule of law and just confiscating it because they can't possibly using it? There's people in need. What's wrong with that idea? Why should it stay in with the people that earned it in the first place when they shouldn't be able to pass it on to their children because they should start from scratch anyway, shouldn't they?
Well, if it were a one-off, you may be right. But frankly, when you do wealth taxes or death taxes, it does change the incentives. For example, I'm 78 years old. I'm still working full-time. I love it. And I have 13 grandchildren, and that's why I'm working. And if you stopped me from giving to my grandchildren or took away those incentives, I'd reduce the amount I work, if not totally.
Arthur, what if you just talk about fairness? Why should someone have $1 billion, $100 million, $10 billion, $100 billion, and other people can't put food on their table? Why doesn't it just make sense for fairness to take that and move from one side of the ledger over to the other? It just seems like it makes sense. It seems like the compassionate thing to do, Laffer. I don't understand.
Well, read Kurt Vonnegut's Harrison Bergeron if you don't. Why should some people be taller than others? No, I'm not very tall. Why should some people be handsomer or uglier than others?
You're talking about me
There
now.
are all sorts of redistributions that can be done here. And in Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, you see the ridiculous system that it finally comes to if you try to equilibrate everything. You will get nothing in return. Whenever you redistribute income in any way, shape, or form, you always reduce total income.
In all seriousness, thanks, Howard. In all seriousness, Chris, that's my biggest problem, is I can see how we can make sure that people here don't get there anymore. That's one thing. But I don't trust the government to take the Robin Hood proceeds and to do anything effective with it to try to bring the bottom up. I think organically you need economic growth to build the bottom.
Let me just say,
hold on, I was talking to Chris.
Sorry. Two things. To your previous point about fairness, I think you're actually dead on. There are two numbers I want to give to you. Okay. Right now, the top 0.1%, they pay about 3.2% of their wealth in taxes. The bottom 99% pays 7.2% of their wealth in taxes. The wealth tax that Elizabeth Warren at least has put forward is just a step towards actually evening the scales. So this isn't about redistribution. It's actually about just basic tax fairness. To your second point about what's it going to fund? We have a lot of government programs that we know work quite well. You could start with the EITC, but you could also talk about education, childcare. You could talk about a lot of the climate policies that the Green New Deal folks are articulating. There are lots of places to invest. And in fact, we've gone through 40 years of massive disinvestment, which is a big reason that wages have stagnated.
Is the reason that the bottom percentage pay the most of their existing wealth in taxes because of Social Security and the payroll tax?
They're paying the payroll tax, they're paying property tax, they're paying income tax, they're paying sales tax, they're paying gas tax. Those are all taxes which I think...
taxes like sales tax.
Exactly, which I think are generally a good thing because they fund the public sphere and they make life in America peaceful and prosperous for the most part. It's just that we have a free rider problem. The top 1%, and even more specifically, the top 0.1%, those with household wealth above $50 million, aren't paying their fair share.
But we just heard the top 1% pay 40% of total taxes. So one man's fairness is another, or one woman's fairness is another unfairness, that there's 1% is shouldering 40% of the burden of tax revenue.
Of the overall revenue. I'm saying that
but we're back to thinking they have so much they can afford more. That's what you're saying, basically.
I'm saying
right?
that the folks who are part of the 1% shouldn't be paying a lower rate than administrative assistants, cleaning people, people who are working hard, teachers,
But you're back to
cetera.
doing the Social Security, and they obviously, a lot of their taxes aren't income because they, they've already accrued it and they're paying lower capital gain. Art, why don't you address that? I mean, it just...
Yeah, I would love to. The problem is that with poor people, not with rich people. The problem is that they're poor. We should make it so that they rise up, not pull other people down. And when you look at it, whenever we've raised the highest marginal income tax rate in this country, revenues from those people have dropped. And whenever we've cut the highest marginal tax rate, for example, with Harding and Coolidge from 77% to 25%, revenues from the top 1% skyrocketed. When we did it with Kennedy from 91 to 70, revenues from the top 1% skyrocketed. And also with Reagan, the same thing happened, documented there. It's just the facts. And the problem is the poor. And the poor benefit mostly from economic growth and jobs. Kennedy put it perfectly, I thought. The best form of welfare is still a good, high-paying job. But the bottom line is we should have a low-rate, broad-based flat tax, and then Warren Buffett would pay what he deserves. And frankly, that's the way to go, a low-rate, broad-based flat tax.
I think we agree we have to lift the bottom. But right now, if you have a child under 5 in New York State, for instance, you're paying $14,000 in child care expenses. So when we talk about lifting the bottom, I mean, the expenses, because government hasn't provided much needed services, which would benefit people, increase labor force participation, et cetera, the bottom is trying very, very hard. And you need tax revenue to do that. And we have historically, let's be clear about where the rates are. They are historically low, much lower than they were for the 40 years after the Second World War. And as a member of that 1%, 0.1%, I can tell you, I can afford a little bit higher taxes, and it would make my life better.
You're missing a few decimal points.
It's facts.
Got to be 0.00001. You left out a few decimal points.
0.1, 0.01.
No,
I think the point's
0.000. Come on.
The point is clear.
Come on, you should be proud. Say it loud and say it proud.
The point is clear that my taxes should be higher. Absolutely.
Then pay them. If you want to pay them, I have no problem with you sending a check to the government, if that's what you want to do with your money.
All right, how much could we raise with, isn't eventually we're going to run out of rich people's money? We don't have enough to solve everything we need to try to solve. I guess maybe the people would you'd feel better.
We're a long way from running out of rich people.
But what's the wealth tax rate? What does the wealth tax raise?
I don't even think the point necessarily is about how much money you can technically raise.
Why not?
We're at a, excuse me?
Why not? That's what we're trying to solve, the $21.5
No, I understand,
trillion
but I think
debt
that the
problem.
conversation that's happening in America today is not really about that.
But Andrew, what if you...
For better or worse, I think the conversation...
Well, it might be for worse, Andrew, because we want to grow more. We want to grow quicker, and that will solve our bigger debt problems.
I agree with
you. And if there is a problem sometimes if you raise taxes... And the unintended consequence is that growth slows.
As you know, I am not arguing for a 70% wealth tax or a 70%
No, I know,
tax
but you see what I'm saying. But you're saying that the discussion is about this tone and about fairness.
It's about what he just suggests. There is
those
a general sense
are
of
different
unfairness
about the system. Doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that you're correct. It doesn't mean that your feelings are correct just because you can conflate different income levels based on Social Security.
Some economic numbers based on this. Jim Paulson sent in something that look, we did see a massive drop in household income in 2008 with the financial crisis.
Right.
You saw it pick back up pretty sharply, though. He just sent this chart that says the median real U.S. household income plunged in 2008, but by the end of 2013, it was rising pretty sharply. Now we're back above the trend line pretty significantly. Does that tamp down some of the reason for this conversation to begin with or not?
Look at what we just did with the Trump tax bill. I mean, we reduced taxes massively on corporations in the 1%. Independent analyses say that 2 to 1, the benefits went to the rich, and Americans don't approve of that. By the way, Americans, when you look at public
Chris, that's just patently false.
Let me finish my point. This tax bill caused $1 trillion of buybacks, and the rich got richer. Americans are tired of it, and there is a sense that it's not about economic populism. It's about funding the public sphere in a way that is more in line with American values.
You can't be in a place where you don't see the jobs numbers on Fridays. You can't be in a place where you don't see that GDP has been growing at 3%. You can't be in a place where you haven't seen wage gains finally starting to happen. When you have but our corporate tax rate was not competitive with the rest of the world. The private sector jobs come from the corporations.
I wouldn't even debate the corporate tax issue.
Well, that's fine. Well, then talk to Chris, because you just heard that the corporate. You don't think the corporate tax cut was helpful to economic growth in the United States?
No, I think that what would have been helpful would have been something like an expanded EITC that would get more people into the labor force, or more funding for
go ahead, Art.
Here's something that Republicans and folks on the right historically generally believe.
Corporations need to be competitive globally in terms of a tax rate, because that's where the private sector job. We're finally seeing some wage gains. We've got 4%. Do you like 4% unemployment? They're better than they've been for 8 years.
Listen, the low unemployment rate is absolutely something to celebrate. Inflating the deficit by 20%.
That's all there is. All we can control is GDP and unemployment.
Is nothing but irresponsible, particularly when 2/3 of those gains went to the wealthiest.
Chris, just dividing a smaller pie more equally doesn't help. Art, go ahead. We want to grow the pie, which is what we're finally seeing.
He should have listened to Steve Leisman's bit on buybacks. I mean, that was excellent report, number one. Number two, there have been 14 countries, the OECD study, that had wealth taxes. They worked so badly that we're now down to only 4, and they're much, much smaller. All the facts point to tax rates matter, and they matter a lot. And when you get a lower rate, broader-based flat tax, economic growth ensues, and a lot of the benefits go to the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, those people who are getting jobs right now. And even Jason Furman, in a piece in the Wall Street Journal, by the way, his report was really good on you, but in the Wall Street Journal showed that growth rates are higher in part because of the tax rate reduction on corporations and on individuals. It's working just the way we dreamt it would. Even revenues are up. Federal tax revenues are up as a result. And, and here I hear this other stuff that's just not factually based. You've got to know your numbers, and it's math. It's not Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, or yelling or screaming. It's facts. Look at what happened when we cut tax rates, what we did.
Art, here's a separate question. Let's just talk about the estate tax for a second.
Yes.
I don't know where you land on that, but as Gary Cohn likes to say, if you're a wealthy person in America, you don't really pay the estate tax.
Of course you don't.
Between trusts. Between trusts and the stepped up basis issue on capital gains, nobody's really paying the estate tax. Is that somewhere where you look at it and you say, okay, I could negotiate there. I could work on that.
Well, I could surely negotiate anywhere to get other things. But an estate tax, I mean, you can earn your income, you can pay your taxes fair and square, you can take that money to Vegas, you can carouse, you can gamble, you can drink, and you can smoke. And as far as my federal government's concerned, God bless you, it's your money. But if you give it to your kids, you rat, they'll take it from you. And that's just wrong. I mean, we should have one flat rate tax, and we should use government spending to help with the problems of daycare
a VAT tax for those.
I call it a net sales tax, but if you want to call it a VAT tax, it's a very efficient, good tax if it's used to replace other taxes.
Can you do it in a way that's not regressive?
Oh, easily.
I have a really naive way of thinking about this.
Do you remember Jerry Brown's flat tax, the 13%? That was mine. We got rid of all federal taxes, all of them, and had 2 flat rate taxes, one on business net sales from the first dollar to the last dollar, and one on personal unadjusted gross income. Again, no deductions, exclusions. They're 13%, and it was much more than revenue neutral. It would have raised a lot of money and would lead to enormous economic expansion. And that was Jerry Brown. We went from 8th in the race in the Democratic primary to 2nd in the race. And if he hadn't chosen his vice presidential candidate wrong, we would have won the presidency. We just barely lost to Bill Clinton. But that's the way to go.
Okay, Art Laffer, thank you.
Thank you.
You get the last word.